Alice giving me the thumbs up, so we are now recording. All right. So today we are going to be talking about setting up your data for success. So we're going to have a look at how you should structure your data to get the most out of it in Excel. We'll have a little bit of a look as well about how you can manage your workbooks and your worksheets too. So just a little bit of a chat about how you can navigate through them and how you can copy them and things like that as well. But without further ado, let's get stuck into Excel. Just turn my video off. There we go. All right. So what I've got here is I have got what would look like a typical sort of report. Now, a lot of people structure their data in this way, but it can be a real problem because I can't really do anything with this now. So you can see here, I've got a company name. So this is a company, this is the region, these are my products, these are the months, and then these are the amounts, the sales amounts here. Now, because this is already structured as a report, it's kind of flat data. There's nothing much I can do with it. If I wanted to pivot it or turn it around, I wouldn't be able to do that. So a much better way to structure this kind of data is, rather than formatting it like a report, is that you structure it like a database, and then you create reports out of that database instead. Okay. So I'm not saying that this as a report wouldn't be attractive. You may still want to make something that looks like this, but do not put your data into your spreadsheet looking like this. So what I've got here instead, I've got another worksheet, and this worksheet is the structured worksheet. So what I've got here instead, I've left that one there so you can see the comparison. So that's the report. What I've done is I've put all of this data into more of a database kind of structure. So at the top here, I have got the column headings. So the column headings are like the fields of a database. So all of these column headings here refer to the data that I'm storing in my spreadsheet. Then below, I've got rows. Okay, so a row is a data set. Okay, so that's one set of data. So here I've got the company name, the region, the product, the month, and the sales. Okay, now one of the advantages of this kind of thing is that I could have multiple regions, I could have multiple companies, I could have lots of different things within here, and then I can pivot this to produce reports that look similar to this report over on the left-hand side. Okay. So if you structure your data like this, let's say that now I want a report that looks like that. I'm just going to pivot that. Now, those of you who know me know that I love to pivot. So I have pivot tables on my quick access toolbar. If you don't, it's on the insert menu, pivot table. It's the one on the most left-hand side. They put the things that are the most useful on the left-hand side here, by the way. Let's see if anyone's ever noticed what's the most left-hand side thing on the home page. I'll just throw that one out there. So if anybody knows what's on the most left-hand side part of the home page, you can put it in the Q&A section right now. It is the most used thing across all Office products. What do you think the most used thing across all Office products is? No one going to make a guess? It is paste. There you go. Copy and paste is the most used thing. Anyway, back to what we're here to talk about. So we've got this pivot table here. If you want, you can right click and say add to quick access toolbar, and then you too will have access to it all the time. Now, because I clicked within this, I had, see how I'm selected within here. If I was selected somewhere else and I hit the pivot table, it doesn't know what region I want. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to click in there, and I'm going to say pivot table. And now it knows, it can see my data. Okay, I'm going to put this onto a new worksheet. I'm going to say OK to that. And now I've got my pivot table report here. So I'm going to remember that this one, our report looked like that. So we've got products, then we've got months, then we've got the sales data. So I'm going to go back to my sheet here. And so I need to have the product. There we go. I've got the product there. I need to have the month, but I'm going to put the month into my columns. So I've got product as rows. I've got columns. Got the months as columns, and then what I need is, of course, my sales data, which is my value. So I can say I want it the other way around. I'm more interested in looking at my months and then my products. Or I might want to say I want a month by month breakdown of each product. Or I might want to say I want a product breakdown month by month. So because I've used a structured data form, I can do a pivot table. And because I can do a pivot table, I can change the way that that data appears. Okay. So it's important that you structure your data well. It just makes your data much more flexible. Other things around this structure as well is because I'm structuring it more like a database, and I've got my, my columns of data. So I've got my columns of data here. Is do not have breaks. Okay, so don't have breaks between your columns and don't have breaks between your rows. So some people might then be tempted to go, well, this is my company name here, or this is my region, but now I'm going to do a different region. I'm going to do the Asian region, and so I'm going to have a break just to make it look prettier, just to sort of break it up. But you don't want to do that, because you'll see here, if I go A, B, C, Co. Well, for a start, do you see how it's not actually helping me fill that in, whereas it normally would? And I can go in here, product. See, it's not helping me fill it in. It would normally do that if I didn't have a gap. Whoops. Product 1, and that's Jan, and then that is the sales of, I don't know, 1,100, let's say. Okay. Now when I go to do, if I wanted to do a pivot table from here, remember, insert, pivot table, it's not picking up that data because I've got a blank row. Okay. If I didn't have that blank row, so if I just delete that row, so I can either just select the individual cells and right click, and I can say delete and say shift the cells up, or I can right click the entire row because I've got no other data here, and I can say delete, and that will delete the whole row. So now when I'm in here and I click pivot table, it picks up the entire data range. And we should also find that now when I start to type, you see, it's picked up on the ABC code for me there. And if I say Asia, A for Asia, and now I say product, well, this one's not going to work because I've got too many to choose from, product 2, and I say Jan, there we go, and so on. So 1, 3, and so on. So by having my data being contiguous, so no breaks between it, it's really helps me to do my data entry, but it also helps when I'm coming to analyze that data. Please don't try to make your data look pretty. Make your reports that are coming out of that data look pretty. Okay. So I'm not having any blank rows. You can have blank cells, but don't have blank rows or blank columns. Okay. All right. Great. So that's some basics for you around structuring that data. Other tips I have for you with your data is never, ever, ever, ever merge cells. Okay, so I know people get quite tempted by this. Let me just insert, they want to put here, they want to put sales for 2016 quarter 1 or something like that, and they go, I want that to appear across all of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to here and I'm going to say merge and center. Okay. Now the problem with that is that when I then go to pivot that, if it has picked up on that and it goes from 1, let's say, I then get an error message. Okay, so you're going to get an error message anytime you try to pivot data that has got merged cells in it. Okay, so some people might also be tempted to go, well, rather than why are you writing EMA in all of those, why don't you just merge and center that? Why don't you just write it once and then merge and center? Because then I can't pivot. Okay, so do not merge cells ever. Okay, so instead what we can do is there's actually a little bit here under the alignment button. Now, those of you who've been to a webinar before will know that this little thing here, this little itty bitty button here, is a dialog box launcher. So that's where they hide the good stuff. So if I click on that, you'll see here that in my format cells, on my text alignment, I have one that is called Center Across Selection. Okay, so if I click on Center Across Selection, I have now centered that. However, the text is actually in that J1. See here? The text is in J1. K1 is empty. You can see by looking at the formula bar, the K1 is empty, M1's empty, N1's empty. So that's how you can, if you want to do that, if you want to have stuff centered, is to do that central cross selection rather than merge and center. Please, please, please don't ever merge cells. Okay. All right. Now, you may be thinking, but Lucy, I have lots and lots of data. And so just putting it into one long list isn't going to work for me. I'm going to split mine across different sheets, and I would ask you not to do that as well. So I've seen a lot of people would do this kind of thing here, and they might put Asia on a different sheet. So where I've got reports structured in sheet 4, they might then go, I've got EMEA on one, and I've got Asia on another, or they might do products on what, product 1 on one, product 2 on one, and so on. So please don't do that, because again, if you artificially split your data up, you're going to make your life difficult for yourself when you're trying to work with that data. So when you're trying to analyze that data, when you're trying to report on that data, when you're trying to quiz that data, when you're trying to get that data to tell you stories, you're going to make your life much more difficult than it needs to be. So do not artificially split your data up. Put it all in the one place, and then use reporting. Use your analyzing tools to pull stuff out of it. Now, again, you may say to me, oh, but Lucy, I'm collecting so much data, I've got so much data that that's not going to work for me. Now, let's see how many rows of data. Does anybody know how many rows? Raise your hand if you know how many rows of data you can have in an Excel spreadsheet. I've got no raised hands. Okay, raise your hands if you think it is more than 100,000. Ali has raised her hands, but nobody else has. So you think you got less than 100,000. Oh, you really underestimate Excel, everyone. You've got over 1 million. So you've got 1 million rows on this one sheet. And so that's 1,048,576. Okay, so if you have a heading row at the top with your column, which you want, you'll need your column headers. Then that's actually 1,048,575 rows of data that you can have in a single worksheet. Okay, and of course you can have multiple worksheets in your workbook. Right. Okay, so don't artificially split your data up. Do not merge cells. Do not try to make it look pretty. Okay? All right. So let's talk a bit more now. I'll just wait and pause for a moment and see if anybody has any questions. So if you've got any questions on that, and I'll pause before we move on to looking at how you actually manage your worksheets within a workbook. Okay, I'm not getting any questions, so let's move on. Now, in the old days, there used to open up a workbook, and it would have 3 worksheets in it by default: sheet 1, sheet 2, and sheet 3. And the number of times I would see a workbook come around that had 1 sheet used and the other 2 weren't being used at all, but they were still there. So Microsoft changed their minds, and you now have the default is for 1. But if you want to add in new ones, there's just this little plus button here. So I can just hit the plus button there, and that will insert a new sheet for me. Okay, that one's called sheet 5. If I want to, I can right click on that. And when I right click on it, I can say rename. And I can call this anything I want. And then just hit enter. You need to make sure that you hit enter. As you see, you can have spaces in that. You can use capitals and so on. You can't use special characters. Because like exclamation marks and things, because that's how Excel refers to sheets internally. So in formulas and that sort of thing, so you can't have special characters. Other things that I can do here is, again, I can right click and I can change the color. So I can say I want this sheet to be orange, and I can change the color of it. Okay. See that? Other things I can do. I can, of course, delete it. I can rename it. I can view the code. I can protect it. I'll talk about that more in a moment. I can hide it. Okay. I'll talk about move and copy, then I'll talk about hide and why you might want to do that. So if I say move or copy, I can go here and I can move it to a different place, or I can move it to another workbook as well. So you'll have a list here of all of the workbooks you have open. So any workbook you have open will be here, and you can choose to move it, or you've got this tick box here that says create a copy. So that is how you do a copy of a worksheet. So I can move this into a new worksheet, or into a new workbook, or I can just move it around here. So I can say move to end, create a copy, and I'll say oh, okay. And now I've got structured too. So they're exactly the same. And now I can come in here and I can rename that one. Oops. Okay, all right. So I can do lots and lots and lots of that. Let me just add lots of other sheets on here as well. So we can have lots and lots of sheets, and then life gets a bit complicated. So let me just keep adding them on. Here we go. Oh, it's moving. That's annoying. Stay in the same place. So I've now got all of these sheets here. Now, I can navigate through them using these left and right buttons here. Okay, so that will help me move through. I will also see that I've got these three little dots here. So I've got three little dots here, and that will take me, that will also move me through. So that's like having the scroll bar, because your scroll bar here scrolls you through the sheet, and that's is more like the scroll bar to move through the sheets. You'll notice here I get my double-headed cross too. So my double-headed one means I can make my scroll bar smaller or bigger, depending on how many of the sheets I want to see. Also, what I can do is I can right-click. So if I come over here to this, is you see here I've got these moving buttons. If I right click on there, I can see all of my sheets, and so that's another way that you can navigate around. Okay. Okay. All right. So if you've got lots and lots of sheets, that's a way that you can navigate around there as well. They used to have in previous versions, there used to be little fast forward buttons that would take you to the very end one, but they have apparently they've taken that away. Okay. All right. Now, I did say here as well, one of the things you can do if you right click is you can hide your sheet. So why might you want to hide a sheet? Now, those of you who came to the webinar, have watched the webinar on managing large data sets, I think it was, where we talked about how you can create drop-down lists. So let's say that in here I wanted to make sure that people were only ever picking product 1, 2, 3, or 4, just to make sure that my data was clean. Then I could create a drop-down list, and I could enforce that drop-down list on people, so that when they came in here and they went to, oh lordy, now I'm testing myself, aren't I? Data validation, here it is. On the datasheet, data validation, and I said allow from a list, and I went and looked at that list, the source from the list, I could turn that into a drop-down list. Okay. Now, often what I would advise people to do is to have a source for that. So have a sheet that contains all of their lists. So if you're doing a lot of drop downs, that you have a sheet that contains all of the lists, and then you might hide that because you don't want other users going in there and making changes to it. So that's and also it just keeps things neater and tidier. So that's another thing. If you're sending this to somebody and you don't want to see the raw data, so if I don't want people to come in here and see this structured data, I just want them to see the pivot table that I have made, then I would hide all of the other sheets and just show them this one. Okay. Now, if once I've hidden something, so let's say that I hide that, if I want to then unhide it, you'll see that I can right click anywhere and say unhide, and it will show me all of my hidden sheets. Okay, so I can unhide my sheets like that. If I want to, I can then what we call protect the workbook. So I could actually make it password protection. So I can put a password on it to say you can only unhide sheets if you put in the correct password. Now, using passwords in Excel. All right. Not only can I stop people from unhiding sheets. I can also protect cells, so I can make some cells locked, so people can't go in and mess up my formulas and things like that. They can only edit the cells that I let them edit. And again, so adding a password to that is a great way to do it. The problem is if you add a password to your spreadsheet and then you forget that password, ain't no one can help you. Right? I can't help you, Service Desk can't help you, Microsoft can't help you. That password is lost forever. So if you just be aware, you need to be aware of that. If you're going to password protect, there is no way to recover that password. There are people on the internet who say they can recover it for you. Do you really want to get involved with those kind of people? So my advice to you is if you are going to be using password protecting your spreadsheets, you only really do it, think very hard before you do it, okay? Because you can still protect cells without adding in a password. So you might want to think about doing that. Sorry, I'm just rethinking what I just said. If you're really trying to, are you trying to stop people doing malicious things or unmalicious things? You know, and if you are going to use a password, then please use some kind of password manager. LastPass is the one that is recommended by the university. So please don't, or write it on a sticky note and stick it in your drawer, whatever you want to do with it. It's only for your spreadsheet after all. It's not your university password. You would never do that with your university password. But yeah, so if that's another thing that you can do with your spreadsheets is that, and your workbooks, is you can password protect them, and you can do that to individual cells as well. All right. So that was really what I wanted to talk to you about structuring your workbooks and structuring your data in a way that is going to help you to get the most out of that data. So remember, don't try to make your data look pretty. Go for something more like this. So make sure that you've got the field names. So you've got these field names here, and then you've got your data set. So your data set is then the information that goes underneath those field names, so into your columns. So columns are fields and rows are data sets. Don't have any gaps in your data, so it's fine if you've got an empty cell. Like if I had an empty cell like that, that is fine. I can still pivot that. That is not a problem. But make sure that you don't have any blank rows or blank columns. So make sure your data is contiguous. Do not merge cells, okay? Just don't do it. So don't merge cells. And do not artificially split your data. So don't artificially split your data up by putting, in this kind of example, by putting your regions onto different sheets and that sort of thing, or my products onto different sheets, because there is some point when you will need to merge that data. If you ever need to look at that data as a whole, you are just making your life difficult for yourself. Okay. And that was all that I wanted to show you. So we will just pause now and see if we have any questions on structuring your data, your worksheets, or your workbooks. We appear to have the quiet mob in today. No questions at all. All right, well, I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions, and I will just launch our little poll. Let me see. Here it is. Just give us a little bit of feedback about the webinar. So just let us know what you thought of the webinar today, short and sweet today. And if you are typing a question, then perhaps you just want to raise your hand so that we know. Okay, and I'll close that poll in another 10 seconds. Okay, guys, thanks for giving your feedback. I see nobody has raised their hands, so I take it nobody's asking a question. I will ask Ali to turn off the recording, and then we'll see if you've got any